Good morning, Mrs. Mays. How are you today?
Oh, just fine.
Good. I'm just going to look you over real quick. I'm going to listen to your lungs.
To measure oxygen saturation with pulse oximetry, first ensure that this intervention is appropriate. For example, by assessing for adventitious breath sounds, signs of altered oxygen saturation, and/or a physician's order.
Okay, Ms. Mays, let me just look here and see if I can find a good site that I can put my sensor. Your nails
Then
look so
select a
pretty
site for
today.
sensor placement, such as the patient's earlobe, the bridge of her nose, a toe, or a finger.
Looks like you have good circulation here. That makes a good spot to put the
However,
sensor.
avoid a finger on the
Take
same
off your nail
side
polish
as an
from one
electronic
finger.
blood pressure cuff, and avoid any site that has edema, altered skin integrity, or hypothermia. If the selected site is a finger, remove any nail polish or artificial nail with acetone or polish remover, and ensure that the site is free of moisture. Assess the capillary refill. If it's more than 3 seconds, select an alternate site. When a patient has special needs, plan to use an ear for a patient with tremors, an ear or bridge of the nose for a patient with peripheral vascular disease, a tape-on sensor for a patient who is too obese or active for a clip-on sensor, or a clip-on sensor instead of a disposable adhesive one for a patient with a latex allergy.
Okay, Mrs. Mays, I'm going to really need you to be still for me for just a moment.
Next,
I'm gonna make sure
position
you're
the
very
patient
comfortable.
comfortably.
I'm gonna lift
If you're
your
measuring
arm a
pulse
little bit,
oximetry on her
get
finger,
closer.
support the lower arm and instruct her to
Hold your
keep that
finger
finger
still.
still. Then attach the sensor to the selected site, ensuring that the photodetectors align directly across from each other. Now turn on the oximeter. After you get a pulse waveform and intensity display and an audible beep, assess the patient's radial pulse and compare it with the oximeter pulse rate. If they don't match, compare the apical pulse with the oximeter pulse rate, reevaluate the sensor placement, and reassess the pulse rates. Leave the sensor in place until the oximeter reading is constant and the pulse display reaches full strength during each cardiac cycle. Then read the SpO2 on the digital display.
Fine here. The doctor is wanting us to monitor this for a few hours. So I'm
For
gonna set you
continuous
up. You can go
monitoring,
on and continue to
adjust
read
the
your
alarm
magazine to
limits
try
for
to
the
keep the finger as
SpO2 and
still
pulse
as
rate
possible.
based on the patient's condition and/or
And this will let
physician's
me know if
orders,
anything goes
and
wrong.
verify
We'll
that the alarms are on.
Mrs. Mays, everything looks good here.
Also, assess her skin integrity under the
Top of
sensor
your
at
finger,
least
let me
every
just
2
look at it
hours,
here.
and relocate the sensor at least every 4 hours.
It does look good, but the doctor wants
After intermittent
Mrs.
monitoring,
Mays,
or
everything
when
looks really good
discontinuing
here.
continuous
Let me just turn
monitoring,
this off.
turn off the power to the oximeter,
And if you can turn your
remove,
head all the way
clean,
over
and
there,
store
I'm
the
just going to
sensor.
remove the sensor. And I'll be back to check on you in just a bit.
Okay.
As part of your follow-up care, compare the patient's SpO2 with her baseline and acceptable SpO2 whenever oxygen therapy begins or ends, before and during sleep, before and after suctioning, if the patient complains of shortness of breath or chest pain, and during activity.